The city was wrapped in a thin, icy blanket of winter, and the streets echoed with the hurried footsteps of people desperate to escape the cold. Streetlights flickered as the wind cut through the alleyways, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow and exhaust. Most pedestrians scurried past, their faces buried in scarves, minds fixed on their destinations, oblivious to the struggles around them. But for 8-year-old Emma, nothing about that winter night was ordinary. She clutched her father's hand tightly, her little fingers trembling. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice quivering, "her baby is freezing." Richard Hawthorne, CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the country, glanced down at his daughter. He was dressed in his tailored coat, briefcase in hand, and the lines of stress etched across his face were evidence of the endless hours of board meetings, investor calls, and deadlines that defined his life. He had learned to navigate high-stakes situations with precision, but Emma's words pierced through all the polished armor he wore. "Emma, slow down," he said, trying to maintain his usual calm tone. "We don't know what." "No, Daddy," she interrupted, her small hand tugging him urgently. "We have to help her. Look at the baby." Richard followed her gaze and saw them, mother and child huddled together on the corner of a darkened street. The woman's clothes were worn and tattered, and her hair clung to her face in damp strands from the icy drizzle. The baby, no older than 6 months, shivered violently in her arms. A thin, threadbare blanket barely covered the infant. Richard felt a pang of discomfort in his chest. He was used to high-rise offices, heated conference rooms, and private jets. He was not used to seeing suffering so raw, so exposed, so impossible to ignore. Emma's eyes met his, wide and pleading. "Daddy, please. We have to do something. You can help her." He sighed, a mixture of frustration and awe, and knelt to get closer to their level. "Okay, Emma, let's see what we can do," he said softly. He took a deep breath, realizing that this wasn't just about charity or goodwill, it was about humanity. His little girl had seen something he had ignored for years, the pain of someone truly vulnerable. They approached slowly. The mother looked up, startled, her eyes wary and tired. She hugged her baby closer instinctively, as if her mere presence could ward off the cold. I'm fine," she whispered, voice trembling. "Please, I don't need," Emma interrupted gently, her small hand reaching out to brush the baby's cheek. "No, you do need help. You're freezing. He's freezing." Richard felt a tug at his heart. There was no time for hesitation. He unbuttoned his coat and draped it around both the mother and her child. Then he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thermos, and handed her a steaming cup of tea. "Drink this slowly," he said. "It will warm you up." The mother's lips trembled as she accepted the tea, her gratitude hesitant but unmistakable. "Thank you." Emma smiled warmly at the baby, whispering, "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." She wrapped her arms gently around the baby's tiny body, and for a moment, Richard realized that his daughter was braver than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just offering comfort, she was showing courage and empathy beyond her years. Richard watched quietly as the woman sipped the tea and adjusted the blanket. He noticed the sharp angles of worry etched into her face, the exhaustion that seemed to weigh on her like a physical burden. He imagined the countless nights she must have spent wandering the streets with her baby, the fear that must have gripped her every time the wind howled through the city, and the small hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Richard asked gently. The woman shook her head, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. No place. Just the streets." Emma's hand squeezed her father's. "See, Daddy. We have to help her. Please." Richard swallowed hard, his corporate mind racing. He had meetings, deadlines, responsibilities, and an empire to manage. But here, on this icy street corner, none of that seemed important. What mattered was this, a mother and her baby, shivering in the cold, relying on the kindness of strangers. And his little girl, with her unwavering determination, had reminded him that compassion is not something you can schedule, it is something you must act on. He took a deep breath and made a decision. "Okay," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "We're going to help you." The woman blinked, surprised. You don't even know me." "No," Richard admitted. "But my daughter does. And she's right. You shouldn't be out here like this." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and quickly searched for a nearby shelter. Most were full or closed for the night, but he wasn't about to give up. Then he remembered the small service department his company kept for emergencies, a place meant for visiting executives, but it was heated, secure, and empty. It wasn't much, but it was safe. "Come with us," he said, offering his arm to the mother. "I have somewhere we can take you tonight. Warm beds. Food. Safe. You and your baby deserve that." The woman hesitated, pride and fear warring on her face. But Emma stepped forward, taking her hand gently. "It's okay. We'll help you," she said, her voice small but firm. Richard felt a lump in his throat. Watching his daughter show such empathy, he realized that this moment, this simple act, was far more valuable than any boardroom victory. He helped the mother to her feet, supporting the baby in her arms. They walked together through the snow-dusted streets, the cold wind no longer seeming quite so harsh, because hope had found a place among them. By the time they reached the apartment, Richard had begun to feel something he hadn't in years, the pure satisfaction of helping someone without expecting anything in return. Emma eagerly helped the mother settle the baby into a warm crib, covering her with soft blankets. Richard made hot cocoa for both of them, and as they all sat together in the cozy apartment, he realized that this night, which began as an interruption, had transformed into something unforgettable. For the first time in a long while, Richard saw life through his daughter's eyes, a life where compassion mattered more than power, where love could be a force stronger than ambition. And he knew that this was just the beginning, because on that cold winter evening, on a street most people ignored, a CEO and his little girl had discovered the extraordinary power of kindness, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The morning sun filtered through the frosted windows of the small apartment, painting golden streaks across the room. Outside, the city roared to life with the usual chaos, honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant wail of sirens. But inside, a quiet warmth lingered, almost magical. The woman, now slowly awake, peeked at her baby sleeping soundly in a soft crib. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. Richard, in his crisp morning shirt, was making tea in the kitchenette. He moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind was far from the spreadsheets and financial projections that usually consumed him. He watched Emma sit beside the baby, gently brushing her tiny fingers across the infant's cheek. "She's going to be okay now," Emma whispered. The mother's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. I don't even know how to repay you." Richard shook his head. "You don't have to. This isn't about repayment. You and your baby deserve safety, warmth, and a chance to start over. That's all." For the woman, those words were almost too much to believe. Years of hardship, shame, and struggle had taught her to distrust kindness. Yet here was a little girl, and her father, showing her a compassion so genuine it almost felt unreal. It was as if the universe had pressed pause on her suffering and allowed her a glimpse of hope. Over the next few days, Richard and Emma worked to make the woman's life more stable. They brought her clothing, warm meals, and essentials for the baby. But more importantly, they offered guidance and encouragement. Richard leveraged his connections to help her find temporary work, ensuring she had a steady income. Emma spent her afternoons teaching the baby's mother to read and write, something she had never had the chance to learn. One evening, as they sat together over dinner in the small but cozy apartment, Richard asked gently, "Do you want to tell me your name?" The woman hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Clara. My name is Clara. And this little one, her name is Lily." Emma's face lit up. "Lily. That's a beautiful name." She reached over and touched the baby's tiny hand. "We'll take good care of her, Clara. I promise." Weeks passed, and the bond between them deepened. Clara learned not only to survive but to hope again. She no longer hid from the world in alleys and shadows, she embraced opportunities with cautious optimism. She marveled at the way Richard and Emma treated her, not as a charity case, but as family. And the baby, Lily, thrived in the warmth and security of their care. Richard began to see the transformation not just in Clara and Lily, but in himself. Corporate power and financial success had always defined him, but now he realized that true influence lay in touching lives, in creating change that mattered on a human level. Emma had been his teacher in this unexpected classroom, a lesson in empathy, courage, and unconditional love. One crisp morning, Richard took Clara and Lily to a nearby park. Emma ran ahead, giggling as she held Lily's tiny hand. Richard watched them, heart swelling with pride and awe. "I never thought I'd see this day," he murmured. Clara looked at him with a soft smile. You made it possible, she said. Not just for Lily, but for me. For all of us. Richard shook his head. No. You made it possible. You found the strength to keep going, even when everything seemed lost. I just gave you a hand. The woman's eyes glistened with tears. A hand that changed everything, she whispered. Richard realized then that this experience had shifted something fundamental in his life. He had always believed that success was measured in numbers, profits, and acquisitions. Now he knew that true success was measured in moments like this, in the relief in Clara's eyes, in Lily's laughter, and in the warmth of Emma's unwavering compassion. Months later, Clara secured a permanent job at a local community center. She and Lily moved into a modest apartment nearby, close enough to maintain the bond they had forged with Richard and Emma. Their lives were no longer defined by fear or survival, but by growth, learning, and hope. Emma often visited, dragging along her coloring books and snacks for Lily. Richard, who had once thought of weekends as a break from business, now looked forward to these moments as much as any deal or boardroom meeting. They shared stories, laughter, and lessons that money could never buy. One evening, as Richard reflected on the journey that had begun with a single winter night, he found himself standing at the corner where it all started. The street was busy, but he saw no one shivering, no one struggling with despair. And he realized something profound: kindness has a ripple effect. A single act, driven by compassion, can touch lives in ways you never imagined. He thought of Emma, her small voice so full of conviction. Daddy, her baby is freezing. Those words had awakened him to a world beyond contracts and balance sheets. They had reminded him that every life, no matter how overlooked, deserves dignity and care. Clara and Lily had become more than a project or responsibility, they were family. Their story had intertwined with Richard and Emma's in a way that was permanent, life-affirming, and beautiful. And as he watched his daughter tuck Lily into bed that night, whispering softly, "Good night, little one. You're safe now," he understood that some lessons could never be taught in a classroom or boardroom. They had to be lived, because sometimes, a single moment of awareness, a little girl's cry for help, can change the course of lives forever. And in the warmth of a home once shared with strangers, a CEO, his daughter, and a homeless mother discovered the truth: compassion is not just an act, it is a life-changing force that creates hope where there was once only despair. As Richard closed the door behind him and watched the small family in the glow of their living room, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: complete fulfillment. The kind that comes not from wealth or status, but from knowing you have made a real difference. And for Emma, it was simply the joy of having helped someone in need, a joy that would stay with her forever, reminding her that even the smallest voices, when heard, can spark the greatest change.